hour. We
that was the
we
real one.
couldn't record it because neither Dorian or I had the privilege, the like the admin privileges on Zoom. So I loomed it on my computer, and what happened was it picked up my voice really great, and you could barely hear anything else. And so I was gonna see if I could figure out. I might be able to like run it through Descript and get a transcript, so I could put the words on the screen. I don't know. I'm gonna try something. Just haven't had time yet, and once I do, I'll try to upload something. I mean, there'll be clips at least I can upload.
Oh,
But
Drew,
yeah.
I also recorded it, so
Oh,
I
sweet.
can send you the one I have, and it may be a little bit better.
That would be amazing. Yeah, thank you.
Nice. Yeah, that's great. Thank you everyone for picking up slack for us. I appreciate that. And Drew and Dorian, I need to get you guys just admin access into the
Yeah.
I
We
didn't
realized
realize you
it
didn't
after
have
we
it.
started.
Yeah, so let's make sure and do that today. I mean, it'll take 5 seconds. I think I could just add you. Let me go to a flow here, and we'll just call it set interaction. And sorry, gotta move the Zoom stuff. So if you go searching through, you'll see this one called element set interaction. So this allows you to dynamically change any event on any element. Oh, and I do need to put an element on the page because there won't be one to select here. So we just put something on there. Doesn't really matter what. And then maybe, yeah. All right, set interaction. So now you select your element that you want to change the interaction of. And then you can select from the common codes here, but you can also just change this to text and enter any code or any event code that you want. So if it's not in that basic list, which is like most of the time you're doing this with like on click or on mouse enter or something like that. But if you needed a custom event, you can just type it in here manually, whatever you want. You can also do a key code if you want to do a code. So if you're doing like, if this was key up, you could do then a key code in addition to that. And then you just select the flow to run. And so if you put this into the page load, if you did like this, then on that page, it will set that interaction on page load, and you won't have it set prior to that. We use this a lot with validation. So like you have a button and we don't even set the event of the button click for the form unless all the validation conditions have been met. And then at the end, we'll do something like change the style of the button and then also set the interaction of the button to actually do something. Just makes it a little, it makes it to where it's less likely to find an edge case where someone could click the button and do something beforehand. Yeah, so that's the primary use case. What other use cases do we typically see in interactions, Drew and Dorian?
I was gonna add to that too. It's like this is the main use case, but the kind of other use case would be to remove an action. Just use that same set interaction action, but don't set an action or set the action to blank, and that will actually remove the action. Because a lot of times what I'll do is like if in like a form validation, like he's talking about, like say they're signing up and I want to make sure that they, the email is correct. If it checks and the email is not correct, it'll actually remove the interaction on the submit button in addition to disabling it. So those are the two main uses. I'm always adding like something. If they're signed in, I'll set a special action for them, whatever. If they're signed out, I'll just remove the action from a button.
Exactly. Exactly. So in that last, so you would have like, let's see, it would be enabled, something like that, or this would be disabled. And then I would copy this and make another new flow, set interaction enabled. And it might just be enabled, disabled, and you're doing a set of things. So it'd be like in the enabled one and in the disabled one, your first thing in disabled would be to remove the click event from that element, from the button or whatever it is. And then you might add a style class or set an attribute of disabled or both, or some series of things that mean disabled on that page. And then enabled, you would basically select another flow to run. So maybe I'll just select page load here, but it would be something else like on click, do the thing, and then do sort of like you're doing the inverse of whatever you did on the disabled, right? So you enable the button, you remove the disabled attribute, you change some style classes, and you set the flow to run on the button or something like that. Right, I think that's, yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah, so I mean, today I have some things that we could walk through, or we can do questions, or we could do both. Drew or Dorian, did you have anything in particular that you wanted to go through before I dive into some other stuff?
No, nothing here.
Okay, cool. Cool. So I did let me find it real quick. I did something earlier this week that I think would be useful for everyone. I put it in the Discord, but I want to make sure that everyone saw it. Let me find it. Sorry, it's on a different screen.
He's getting frozen right there.
Too many things running. Let's see. This one. So I put this in the Discord. Here. Let me show my screen again. There we go. So this is about manipulating JSON with grids and how grids use JSON in general. This is a really good conceptual thing to understand about Builder, and that we sort of just treat JSON as if how a coder would kind of treat it. So when we're building an element type or we're building an action type, we assume that there's going to be the different types of standard JSON coming through to it. So a good example of that is our grid element. This grid element will accept any JSON array. So in a JSON array of objects, it'll actually do it with a JSON string array as well. It just doesn't have the property names to set variables into each row. So you can't really do much with the data, but it will actually create like the number of rows from a string array. But primarily it's a JSON array of objects. And so because of that, you can have something like this, and you can set it from the input, and it builds that out here. You can also remove them. You can get them from the grid and set them in there. So all these set and gets with JSON work dynamically just with the grids out of the box. And the same kind of thing happens with actions. So one of the actions I just finished writing up was changing the property name of a property inside of a JSON provided to the action. And so what you're doing there is setting, you can give it a JSON array or a JSON object, and the code automatically is going to handle that, right? So if you say, I want to change property A to be named property B, then it'll look and go, is this a JSON object? Okay, find property A, change it to property B. Is it an array of objects? Okay, loop through each one of them and change property A's name to be property B in all of them. So the reason I'm bringing that up is just to say that for the most part, when we go about actions and elements that accept a JSON, we're kind of handling all these different pieces. What I did here was basically set up a couple of actions. And I did do a video on this as well. This will become a lesson. We just haven't gotten around to making the lesson out of it yet. You can input any JSON into here. And on this button click, you'll run into the grid list, whatever is in that JSON input, and it'll just create the rows based on that. And then the get runs an action that takes the output. It's going to set into the output JSON element the value of that grid list. And this was basically just to demonstrate how when you set the value, you're setting a JSON. When you get the value, you're getting a JSON. And builder data collections are exactly the same thing. It's when you do a data collection request, we're just getting a JSON array. So you can treat it almost exactly like you would for Xano. You can treat it the same for the builder data collections. So I mean, I can go into any kind of depth on this to like drive through the different pieces of how you would use this stuff, or we can talk about any questions anyone has, or that's funny the way that drives through. So, but basically you can, if I type in my own JSON here, what did I name it? I have to look at these things. So in here, this is coming from a variable of name, and this is coming from a variable of description. So if I say name is Mark and description is, I'll just do my last name. And then I'd probably copy that, make it a little easier on me. I'll go Dorian and Pineda. So when I set that from the input, oh, there we go. It basically just goes and renders those rows automatically. And because it has these values in the property names, those become variables in each row. And then because these have the data assigned to them, it automatically pulls the value from the variable corresponding here. So as long as all that matches up, you can use our built-in data tab on elements to hook into data here. There was another question this week in the Discord that was similar to this about storing, like store this entire JSON inside of a field in a collection. So rather than storing these as records, just store it as a field value inside of like the parent record. So it's like child records rather than having a whole other data collection and having IDs and all those things. You can actually just use a similar output for storing that dynamically associated to an existing record rather than having all this child record stuff. And you can do that using our existing actions. So this button here is tied to a delete event or a click event, sorry. And what it does though, is it removes this row from the grid. So the reason that we do it that way is because we're basically treating the grid as the source of truth for the value. So I set the value into it from here. I can get out of it from there and it'll put it into my element here. If I remove Mark and now it's only got Dorian, if I go get from grid again, now it only has Dorian's record in there. And so what that means is that if you're using actions and you just dynamically set a grid manually, let the user do certain things to it, like for instance, when they change this, key up, does a change name flow, and all it does is sets the variable, the current page name, the current page variable called name, to be the name that's, or the value that's in the name field. So if I change this to, Dorian number 2, it's a clone of Dorian. We go get from grid. Now it's going to be Dorian number 2 in there instead. Right. So I'm basically change the value, set the variable. Then whenever I do the get, it gets the current state of all those variables and uses them. So in this way, you can actually like create your own JSON for whatever purpose you want. Maybe that JSON is used to send to an API, or maybe you want to store it, like could be a set of dynamic tags, for instance. A lot of times I'll use this for tags. So I might have a data collection of all the tag names, but I don't want to create another collection just for the tags of a certain record. Instead, I'll just use this, and I'm setting just like tag ID would be in here instead. So it'd be like tag ID and then whatever the ID is of the tag. And then that way I'm basically just handling all this myself. This is very intentional that we structured Builder this way. So that way, once you understand how these things operate back and forth, and if you understand JSON, you can use our built-in things, but you can also just create your own because we just use standard JSON structures. So I know there's a lot to that, but I wanted to see if there's any questions on that. And if not, we can go to some questions in the Discord or some questions in the chat or wherever we need to.
Yeah, there's one in there if we want. I don't know if anyone
Mhm.
has anything on this.
Yeah, any questions on like JSON and using it back and forth? I can go into any detail that anyone needs to go into there.
Real quick, Mark,
Mhm.
where are you setting the variable? Is that just in the action, like in that?
Mhm. Yeah, so like when the user types, if they're changing the value here,
Yeah.
I have an event on the
Yeah.
name field. So change name. It runs a flow called change name on key up. So key up is when they're typing, right? And it's going to run that flow. This is setting the variable into the current page. And in the
Yeah,
context of this, the current page is the row, right?
Right.
So I'm just using this action to set the variable name into the current page, and it
So
always
that's the
pulls
variable
from that.
name, right?
Mhm.
Gotcha.
Sorry? Yeah, so I mean, you're basically manually doing the work that we do in the core whenever you have like data bindings, right? So if you set this grid to come from a collection, it's doing the same thing. It actually gets the JSON, and inside of each row, it actually has the variable name. It's not name, it would actually be, rather than it being here, name. If
Yeah.
you choose from field, and then you
Yeah.
choose a collection and you go down that whole route,
Yeah.
what it's actually doing internally is setting the field ID to pull from, but
Right.
it's really the same thing going on there. We just make it a little bit easier in the UI for you.
Mark, quick question about this. So if you let's say you said you can store this JSON data like as is inside of a record.
Mhm.
Now, let's say, would it just be the same thing saying a variable if you want to pull like a specific piece of that outside of the record rather than just like the whole thing that you stored?
Yeah, so so let's say you store this whole JSON array. Let's put another field on here. Let me move this out of the way. So let's do multi-line text again. Put this one there, so we have a third one, and we'll call this one. Let's see. This will be like, we'll just call it dot notation output because that's what we're actually going to do. So with dot, you can use a thing called dot notation to sort of like step into JSON and get a specific value out of that JSON. And depending on what the starting JSON is, you're going to have a different dot notation to go into with it. So we put another button on here. And let's make a new action or a new flow on the click of that button. And we'll call it, let's call it get name, right? So we're going to get the name out of the first row in there and set exactly just that. Let me change this button name too. So we'll call it get name from first row. All right. And now what I'm going to do is set a value. I'm going to set the value of this dot notation output. And the value that I'm going to get, this can come from anywhere. So if you were storing it in a data collection and the JSON is in that collection in a field, if you're storing it like in a record in a field, you would go maybe through current record field value or a filtered data collection to find the record you want and the field you want. So wherever it's coming from, at the end of the day, you're getting the JSON. So in my case, I'm going to pull it from the grid itself, right? So I'm going to pull it out of that grid. And then I'm going to add a path here. So there's some notation stuff. I'm going to zoom in my browser just so it's a little easier to see. So when you're in a JSON, or when you're trying to like step through a JSON, there are two main pieces to that. One of them is, I'll zoom in here too. One of them is you have, one of them is you'll have the outer bracket, which is like an array bracket. It's a straight bracket. And then you have a curly bracket, which denotes an object inside. And you can almost think of this as like if I were to separate this out, sort of like that. So you can almost think of it like this. Okay, so I have name is, so it's like I have a list of records, which is the outer straight brackets. I have a specific record inside of there, which is the curly brackets. And then I have the field values, which are the properties of that JSON object. So I have property name and description. So I have field name of this record, field description of this record. Like that's kind of how you can think about it. And you can use what's called dot notation to step into it and get a specific thing out of it. So if you look at this one, if I formatted this one the same way over here, if we did like this. So we separate it all out here. Okay, so this one has one list of records with 2 records inside of it. And each record has 2 field values or properties. That's kind of how you can see it. So if I wanted to get something out of the first record here, you have to tell it using dot notation which thing to get out, which record to get out, and then which field to get out. So what I would do is if I wanted to get the name of the first object, call it that, get name of first object. What I would do is, and there's several different ways, we kind of handle different methods here. I usually do 0, but you can do it almost any way, right? Isn't there, Dorian, can't you do like just 0 also here? And can't you also do,
in
you
Builder
just
you can, and
Yeah.
just to point out, in real code,
Yeah.
it's a lot more strict. You can kind of, this Builder's more flexible in the way you write these, but yeah, you can do all those combinations.
we sort of try to anticipate, different common syntax mistakes. And we really do need to put some nice UIs around this. I know we keep saying that, but we really do. We need to do that. Dorian's so close on it. Not necessarily for the dot notation, but for like all the paths and everything. But basically all you have to do here is .0 or 0.name. So what that's going to do is go into whatever the value in the grid list is. It's going to step into the first object or the first record of that array. And then it's going to step into the name property of that first record in the array and return just that piece of it. So the first time I clicked that button, it returned that entire thing. But now if I click it again, we should get just this value, right? So if I start that process over, just so we have multiple, we could also make this just a little more dynamic. Let me zoom out just a little bit so I can see my screen. One more there. So if I put, let's do one more thing here. Let's put another input on here. And this one, let's put it like right here. And this one, what we're going to do is record number. So we're going to pull the value, pull it from there. Actually, can we do that in dot notation right now? I'd have to actually add all kinds of steps here. We probably shouldn't do this. So it'll add, you can do it, but it would add a bunch of steps.
Use a variable in the path, basically.
Yeah. I mean, you can do it, but there's a lot of steps to get that done. So I'll try to make it totally dynamic here on the call. But basically what you can do is, if I take this, I'm going to reset the whole thing. Basically, I'm just going to like refresh. So like we're starting from effectively blank here. And let me just paste the original JSON, zoom out just a little, set that from the input. So now we're going to have these 2 different pieces in there. Okay. Now I can get it from the grid. That'll get the whole thing back in, or I can get the name from the first row. That's just mark. If I come into that action though, and change this to, instead of 0, change this to 1. So 1 is going to get the second row out of it. So if I do that again now it's going to find Dorian because it went to that second row. And note the 0 and the 1, right? So 0 is the first record, 1 is the second record, and so on. Also note that when you get the data out, we actually include that value which is called the array index, in a variable automatically inside of every grid. So you can reference this to know like which one you're in, which is really useful for doing things like if you wanted to process data on a set of rows and you wanted to do it in the front end, you could basically start that process on array index 0. When it finishes, move to array index 1 and run an action on that row or run a flow on that row, get all the way down to the bottom. And at the end of each one of those sets of flows, you can check to see, is the one I'm in the last one, meaning does the array index match the count of the number of rows that are in this grid? And if so, then stop or start over or do whatever you want to do. For instance, like in GMLFG, the NFT portfolio tracker that Drew built, it does that. It cycles down all the way through all of them, rolls back up to the top, runs some things again, and then starts back down all of them and just continuously does that. So you can use that for processing. And I actually did there is a lesson in a YouTube tutorial on doing exactly that out there as well. Any other
And you
questions on
can-
the?
Just one
Okay.
thing on the array index, you do have the option to turn that off on the grid so that when you do use
Good
like a
call.
get value, and if you're not wanting to store that, you can toggle it off. That way it doesn't include it in the object.
So that's this one right here, include array index. The other way you can do that too, if you want to include the array index by default, but then let's say on this get from grid, we're going to run this instead of doing a set value directly. I could do something like remove. There's one called remove property.
Oh, this is answering a question in the chat. So
Oh.
for Emmanuel, he's asking, how do I create a filter in a grid when the field is JSON? So take a JSON array out of the field and then filter it before you set it into like a drop-down menu. It's basically what you're doing here.
Well, I was going to do something a little different, but yeah, I can do that too. So let's do 2 steps. So one is, first thing I was going to do is like leave. So there's sometimes, let's say I wanted to export this list of data, right? And I want to use, we could put another button on here for, no, that was not spelled right. So we could put another button on here for, set as CSV, export to CSV. So you can do a JSON to CSV here. But if I do that, if I get it from, sorry, let me go from the element, from the grid. If I do this directly, what it's going to do is output including that array index because I have it in there, right? But I don't really want that in my CSV output. So what I would do first instead is there's an option here called remove property, I believe. Remove property from object here. And so the first thing I would do is run this, get it from the element, from the grid. So it's going to get the whole thing, but then I want to remove the underscore array index. So you can, oops, totally not doing that right. So underscore array index property name, and then set that into a variable called, I'll just call it output. And then from there, instead of getting it from the element again, I'm going to get it from my variable called output. So now I'm basically transforming that data on the way out. So that way in the grid, in Builder, while I'm using it for other things, I still have the array index there. But when I do it for this specific purpose to export the JSON to CSV, I can just take out what I want. I think Drew did something really similar for in GMLFG, you can actually now export all of your transaction data. And it's like, it's a ton of extra information, right? So it's like, we just need to remove all that extra information before the export happens. So you can do this sort of transformation. For doing a filter like what Drew was describing there, that one is a little bit different. Let me add another new flow here called filter list. It's really filter array. And the action is actually called filter array. And there are 2 of these. Is this what you were going for, Drew? This is what you're thinking
I
of,
think
right?
so, right? It's Emmanuel's question, but I think this is going to be because basically wants to take a JSON array out of the database, filter it, and then use it. So yeah, it's like where
Gotcha.
only
Yep.
mark.
Yep. Yeah. So basically you would have a filter by value in that case, but you can also do a more complex one where you filter an array by another array. So you get only matches that are combined across both lists. That one's a little more complicated, but this one, you're basically say, okay, I have a starting array thing that I want, right? So in my case, the starting array is that grid list, is that grid list. You can also do this to do complex filtering in JavaScript on data collections. So like sometimes we'll bring an entire data collection of data to the page. If say it's like 1,000 records or something, we can do it, bring it all, cache it, and then do really complex filtering on it really fast in JavaScript and never have to hit the server again. So you can use this for really nice speed optimizations too. The starting array property that I'm going to use in my case, because it's not coming from a builder collection, so I don't want like a field from a collection, I'm just going to enter it manually. So the starting array property is name, and I want to filter it only for the ones that equal Dorian in this case. But you could type anything, you could do anything you want. You can say greater than a number, less than, does it contain that value? So you have a bunch of operators to choose from. And I don't remember if I did. It was lower.
Yeah.
It was lower. You can also choose to ignore empty values. So like if in the JSON object, if the value is empty, do we ignore that or do we treat that as well? And then you decide where you want to set the response, either set it into a variable or set it into an element. And I'll set it into a variable here, and the variable will be called, my output, something like that. So what this is going to do is take that, whatever JSON array you provide it, it's going to look for the name in each object. It's going to return only the ones where the name equals the value you provide. Now, this can get much more complex and dynamic because this, for instance, could come from an input on the page, like from an element, say it's a search box, and then you run this filter whenever the user types on key up. So as they're typing, it's going to look in the grid, find it all, and reset it into the grid. For instance, you could take it, put it back out. Like you can do all kinds of crazy things with this. You just want to be careful about like where you're storing the search results and setting them back in and that kind of thing, because you can use this to cascade filters too. So like check this one, filter it, and then the next one gets the previous one and uses that to filter from there. So you can cascade it down. So this transform data filter by value is a really, really powerful searching tool. And it's great because you can use it for any JSON, right? So you can use it for our collections. You can use it for like a Xano response, filter from that. You can use it for literally anything. Let's see, I was looking at other questions.
There were a couple up there. There's one about pasting into the rich images in the rich text editor, and there's one about custom attributes or tag names on elements. At least.
So let's see. Okay, so let's do the HTML attributes. So we really do need to make this much easier long term. But there's a couple things. So on any element, technically you can actually go into the JSON and actually add any attributes you want manually. So like just if you wanted to do it manually and they're just static on that element, that's one way to do it. You can literally add any attribute you want. So you do have to write the JSON properly, but it would be, my attribute, whatever it's called, and then the value that you want it to be. So obviously that's not dynamic. It's just if you want an attribute, you can just set it, and whenever the page renders this element, it's going to pick this up and set it in there manually. So that's one way. Another way is to use an action. So we would have an action for set attribute. I use this a good bit for like dynamically setting attributes, you would use something like this. And if you just type set attribute, you'll see you have it here. And all you're doing here is picking an element, so setting the entering the name of the attribute, and then telling it where to get the value from. So for instance, if I wanted to set the my list heading, I wanted to set an attribute on there, and say I wanted to set the ID of that, I can type it in manually, or I can get it from anywhere else in my project. So for instance, you could take the array index and set it as the ID of an element inside of a row, for instance. And then by having that, you would have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 as the IDs of specific elements inside of those rows. And that would allow you to target them with other actions or do anything else you want. So the key thing to, for these kind of things, like the key concepts that I think once people really grasp those concepts, they can pretty much do anything, is that we're sort of relying on the dynamic nature of the argument types to do a lot of this work. So this, like the set attribute action itself, it doesn't do the work of like, go get the value from wherever it is. The core does that based on the type. All this is doing is saying this element, this property name, and here's the value to set, right? I think those are the two main ways for attributes. Do we have any other methods for setting attributes on elements? I don't know if there's anything else built in.
No, I don't think so.
But I mean, JSON is like the fallback. You go in that JSON, you can always add any attribute you need, including like a lot of ones that are, you know, custom to a specific library or some stuff that would like never be in a platform like this. You can just add whatever you want. So it's pretty cool. And I don't know if you mentioned it, but tag name is right there too on the screen. Most fields have that tag name property, and that's, you can actually type in the value down below where it says H2, you can create any tag name you want. You don't have to select from that drop down.
Yep. Yeah, you can just change these values directly. Value here is what you want to modify. That's what the core picks up to set, is the value.
And I use that one all the time too, is change something into an A tag or you know, a div or a p, swap around for like weird reasons that, you know, you wouldn't normally have an interface for. You just come in here and swap it out.
Yeah, the other thing to note is if you do this through an action, you need to recognize that that action is only going to execute after the elements have all been rendered. So that can cause issues if, for instance, you have a library that needs to reference that attribute and something within that library is executing prior to the actions running. You could get some race condition problems going on. So in that case, if you need it set before, you either need to make sure that you do it in here in the attributes directly, or you just need to make sure that whatever actions or JavaScript is going to execute using that library or whatever it is happens after you've set the attributes properly into the elements, just to make sure that the references are all there. All right. What was the other one, Drew? There was one more, right?
Oh, it was for the rich text editor inserting images. I can probably speak to this one because it's actually more of a concept thing, at least for now in this answer. But basically, well, first of all, the rich text editor we have in the studio is TinyMCE.
Yeah.
So the way that you add images to TinyMCE, anyone can actually add that to their project in Builder if you like know the JavaScript. We just haven't gotten there yet. Like we want to make it at some point potentially where it interacts really well with our image uploader in the studio, like our media library. We have the ability, so we just didn't do it yet. But what I would actually say for that question is I started to not include images in TinyMCE because you can't control as much, like the sizing and all these different things you're controlling like individually in TinyMCE. Whereas what I would like to do in most situations is have like a class on that image. I'm controlling the styles of that class in Builder, that kind of thing. So just as a sort of conceptual tip, if I'm building a blog that's a long form where somebody's going to be inserting text and then an image and then some more text, I would actually break that out into a separate table of content blocks. And so we've done this as a team a couple times and things recently. And so it's like kind of like if you're writing in Notion or Coda or Medium, where you click plus for that line, you're going to either insert a line, you're going to either insert a heading, or you're going to insert a line of text, or you're going to insert an image. And
Right.
so you kind of create, it's a more complicated system to create. So, and I can help in Discord and go through each of the individual steps. But if you create a system like that, you're using TinyMCE or the rich text editor for the text, so they can add all the formatting they want. And then when they insert an image, you're just using a builder image upload element. And then on the front end, you actually have a grid list where you're outputting, you know, in order, like the text and then an image and the text, whatever they have set. And then they can actually like reorder those things easier. So it's a more robust, it's a better UI, basically. It's a better experience for the user if you want to go that route, but it is a little more complex to build.
And I have to run real quick. I have to go, but I do the same thing for Founder Update. And like Drew said, with the ordering, that was one of the big reasons that I did it that way. It makes it to where you can add drag and drop because they're rows in a grid, and we have all the built-in mechanisms for when you drop, there's actions for changing the order of the rows in a grid. There's actually just actions that do that. You just provide it which array index you're moving and where you're moving it to. And that thing does the work of going and manipulating the grid and reordering it. So if you're building a UI like a blog sort of UI for doing that, I think that's by far the best way to do it, what Drew said, because you can also store the data however you want that way. Like each row could be a record in the database, or you could store the whole thing as a block of JSON like we were doing there a moment ago. But it gives you a lot more flexibility that way versus TinyMCE gets very constrained very fast. It's nice because it's real quick. Like you just like set it up real fast, but it gets constrained as you start to like want to do really nice UX or do something like a Notion or something along those lines.
Yeah, just with styling, you can't style anything inside of a TinyMCE block or a rich text block the same way you can in Builder. So by building out to this kind of system, we're actually doing it a more Builder native way, and you have a lot more flexibility.
And I'm gonna make you and Dorian. Oh, I just made you the host, Drew. It won't let me now. I didn't realize like once I do that, I'm no longer a host. I can't make any changes now. So you can make Dorian a co-host if you want. But thanks everyone. Sorry, I got to run a little bit early today. Talk to you soon.
See you, Mark.
I think that actually like answers all the questions in there too. So I don't know if anyone has more, we can just keep going.
We have that one from Fraser.
Oh, right. Yeah, I don't know if you want to describe the one, or I can go look at Discord too. I've been so bad at Discord recently.
Is this the one with the data collection toggling between from variable and from field?
Yeah, it's basically what happens when you try to set up the data tab one way, then another way, and go back. There's an inconsistency in how it's rendered on the screen with that purple color on the element panel. And it suggests that something is being left inside the JSON from your choices. And as you move between them, so order is important. And that speaks to other things that are going on, including today when you talked about putting stuff into the JSON raw. What happens to that if you make subsequent changes? Do you have to go back? What if you don't go back? How is those things interpreted? So I'm trying to figure out how to make the process, well, idempotent. You know, whatever you change is always what it is. The UI shows you what you need to know. And I guess it's not really possible given the flexibility you guys have.
I mean, you could set up like if you are really careful in how you set something up, like when we built that data binding dropdown, if we were like really meticulous and thought of all the different cases, we probably could achieve that. It's just like, yeah, because of the open flexibility, it's like, and we actually, that's one of the things I noticed coming into Builder is like everyone builds with this open flexibility that before I came to Builder, I didn't actually do that. I was much more rigid and code-like. And one of the things I would say is an improvement in my style is like, I keep it very flexible now. And I haven't really run into any issues from that. You know, there's no negative side, but there's a lot of positive side as far as like flexibility while I build. So I think we tend to err on that side of just being more flexible and being, and like these things, like sometimes we'll run into an edge case like that. The crazy thing is that in that edge case, like we'll go fix that in 2 seconds, you know, because the nature of Builder is like, oh yeah, like we'll go boom, boom, and then it's fixed. So that's kind of the way we operate. It's more like get it done and then fix those little edge cases as they come up. So
the problem for people learning though is that they experiment a lot.
Yeah.
And-
Yeah.
And they think that what they just got back to was back to the original time they started, and there's not the case. There's something in
Yeah.
there. So
Yeah.
the solution is always start from scratch. It's very, very disheartening that you may spend a lot of time and have left some remnant in there from a previous choice that you
Yeah.
don't know is affecting what you're doing. So
Well, we
it's a
should
question
fix
of
that. Like,
approach.
that's on us to fix. We shouldn't leave it like that for sure. But yeah, that's
just
and
an
that, I know
example.
exactly the scenario you're talking about. It used to be worse, where like if you just change the top one of the drop downs, the rest stay in, and I had all these things marked purple. We do need to fix it for sure.
It's not that particular one because it's pretty
Oh.
obvious what's going on. It's just in general.
Yeah.
Um, Like I've come to the idea that you maybe have to spend 20 minutes on a problem. And if it's not working, all your settings may be affecting it. So you got to start again
Mm,
and do it again. So because when Mark does it, he does it first time correctly and
yeah.
it works. But if you make a mistake in that process, there's a possibility you may not understand why things aren't working. And that's a
Makes total
conundrum for me.
sense. Yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to bring it up.
Yeah. I think that actually echoes like that's like builders' main problem is we have all this flexibility and then it's hard to break in because there's too much flexibility basically. But yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I don't know. We'll have to think about how to solve it. But
Yeah, we'll definitely add that to our list to go look into that and get that resolved.
let's see. Drop down data from external JSON. For that question about external JSON in a dropdown, I would have to, I don't know if I can even do that one live because I don't have that much experience with it, but I know that there's two sort of things. Let me start pulling up a project while I'm talking. There's two things with setting the dropdown to like binding it. And one is you have to like set it in the binding, but the other is like in the actual dropdown field. So let me just pull that up and maybe that's what's missing. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's something with Xano too. I'm not sure. Just gonna pop a drop down on here real quick. And let me know too if I'm misinterpreting this question. But just to note, the two things to bind the values here. First, the actual collection would have to be bound, or in the case of Xano, it would probably be like a variable that is the API response, has to be bound. And then you also have to come into the properties and bind. So I don't know.
And you can do it direct without even setting any of the properties. The quickest way would be using the set data action, where you're just taking that JSON output from that API response and setting it directly into the element. And you actually don't have to set any settings or anything.
Oh, nice. Yeah, and so that's also a good point too with like set value versus set data. Most of the time, like if you use a set value, it's what you want. But in certain elements like the select, set data is a little different. So set value will actually like change the drop down. Set data is what sets the choices in there. So like Dorian said, if you just use this, it'll just take care of everything for you.
Yeah, but we can try it if you want to hit that endpoint.
What it does right now is it shows that object. Every drop down element is object, like in square brackets, object. It shows something like that.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think it's
When I
probably
put
just
the data.
an issue with the data. Like might need to transform that data.
Yeah. So let's just do it real quick. I gotta find the chat. Sorry. There you go. Let's see. Are there any settings with this, or just hit it just like this?
Yeah, it's open. Hit it like this.
Okay. So first, I'm just gonna set this up to like pull it in, and it's probably not gonna work like we just talked about. I think that's
Yeah,
everything.
we
I
can see
need.
what it is.
But that object thing, a lot of times, yeah. basically I can probably show that it's coming in. It's just being the variable that's being set out of the API call is being set like as a string basic, or it's an object, but it's like there's a confusion with converting it from object to string. So here, if I look at API response, here's the response. It's real and it's an object, but I'm setting it into a variable then from the API, or somewhere in there, it's getting a little confused. So what you do is on this set data, so I get the variable from the API call, and then on the set data or anywhere else that you're going to use it, you can add a path of JSON parse like this. So it's capital JSON and a capital P. It's a little different in JavaScript. This is a thing. It does the same thing, but the syntax is slightly different. But if you had that JSON parse path like that, I think that might work.
Yeah, and on that set data, there's actually a built-in argument for that. You just toggle it to true.
Oh, sorry, I didn't even look at that. So yeah, so I don't need this because right here, we do it for you. But what's interesting is it didn't actually work. But it did do, like there's two records, it showed the two records, it just didn't come through correctly. So this might be something different. This might be on us. I don't know if this might be like a bug.
Let's try binding on the element property. So maybe it does need it because it's in an object. So go to the properties, just so we tell it what we're using for the
In here, you
ID.
mean?
Yeah.
Or up here?
Down below. So collection field.
Or should I do
But we'll
this?
need to manually.
So this is a good example of like, this is what we do whenever we run into an issue. We pop right into this JSON. So it's only letting me select from a collection. So I can check in here if maybe I can, and I don't even know, I barely use selects, I think. So I don't even know what I'm looking at yet.
I think it hasn't stored that yet because we haven't made a change to it. So just pick something on both of those and then we can change it.
So yeah, I just set these, and now in theory, it would set them in the JSON. So I'll set both these values. And then I can go look in here. Then data bind text, data bind value are in here. So this is like, all right, let's see, display name, value.
It'd just be the value that we need to change, and then the type we can change it to text.
And I don't know, I don't remember even what those were. So let me check. So the values we're looking for come from this API response. So admin name is one, and then email is another.
Yeah, or you can use ID for the, I'm not sure what he's trying to store when he does a get value.
Oh, it has an ID. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
True.
So I'd say the text is that value, that name, yeah, exactly. And then change that to text. Or just static, I guess, static dot text, right?
Oh yeah, I always mix these up. Like basically when I'm doing this, Dorian knows these because he knows it. But when I'm doing this, I'm always like going back to other places and copying a value and pasting. That's kind of how I figure out what these exact values are.
And then ID is probably fine. We'll just change that to text, yeah. And then save.
Save changes. And with JSON, you always have to save at the bottom. It doesn't auto save.
There you go. That's it.
So yeah, that's a little crazy. Like we'll probably have to accommodate that somehow, but at least you can come back and watch this video and get it done and keep moving. But yeah, essentially it's coming into the JSON and changing these values and then making sure, you know, that I think I could go back and try that parse JSON. I might not even need that. It doesn't hurt if you have it on a JSON and you add it, it's not going to hurt anything actually. So yeah, so I didn't even need that. So we were all good without, it wasn't that first issue I thought it was. It's just API call, set element data, and then go change that, update that JSON to the correct field names. So hopefully that helps. That's a little roundabout.
One thing you can do that might simplify that is you can duplicate that element type. And then on your duplicate element type, just go change the default type for the data ID and the display to just come from text.
Yeah. So in here, what he's talking about is actually if once you drop an element onto a page, it comes into your project, you know, and it's yours to edit or you can duplicate. So if I come into elements, this is a test project that only has this one element I dropped, but I can duplicate this here Or if you feel saucy, I guess you can just come in and change it too.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I would do that. Like in this case, what I'm doing is adding an additional choice. I'm not actually changing anything. So I would come in, I probably wouldn't even duplicate it, but I would come down to the arguments. These are the actual arguments for this element. And collection field display name. If I click on it, it's loading, hang on.
Yeah.
It's going to display like all the choices that the user has.
On the element is just the select. So
Oh,
right now,
my bad. Okay.
Yeah.
So then in this case, I would probably duplicate it because I'd be changing. This is like a pretty big change, but so I choose the input I want. And then on this type, I can just do text. And if I did this and saved it, then is this one going to be updated already, you think? Yeah, so collection field display name is a type of text now. And I could actually just type that variable in. Then you don't have to edit the JSON.
Yeah.
In actions, you can have multiple types where you can select. So in actions, you're just basically checking a box. That's why I wouldn't duplicate in actions. If there's like 3 input types that we allow in the default and I want to add one more, I'll just go in, check the box and go out. And now I can add 4 instead of 3. You don't need to duplicate. In this case, that's a pretty big change. You might have other ones on there that are using the field name. So you would actually just want to duplicate the element and then use the new one, which would be 3-dot menu, duplicate, and this is like the new one. And everything else, I mean, you make your change there so that it's different, but then now you'd have it in your elements list. I think it's at the bottom or something, or
yeah, being custom.
there you go. And now this one would have your new options and you can still use the original. Oops.
That was correct. It's just you X'd out of it because that one, when you first drop it, when it's in the custom,
yeah.
it wants you to add the select options.
Yeah, no, I was actually looking at this chat. I was probably like this,
Oh,
but I have
gotcha.
the chat up and you guys can't see it. It's going back to the questions. There's a question in there about, and then there might be more that I didn't see yet. There's a question about showing that content block blog setup. I'm going to see if while I'm talking, I can open a project that has it and just show it. I feel like we just did it for something.
Yeah, well, we have it in the builder project.
I think that's probably because I built that one. That's the easiest for me to go find.
Yeah.
The builder project, as you can imagine, is pretty huge. Let me see if I can find this blog page. So blog and blog admin, content blog. All right. Just give it a second to pop in. It's funny because any slowness, like we every update, we try to make things faster and fix speed, but any slowness that anyone is feeling, like we're feeling it times 10 in here. So that's why we push so much in these speed updates. All right, let's see. Blog. It looks like the old blog. Sorry, it's a lot in here. I think I'm in the wrong workspace. Now my computer is frozen up. Not sure what's happening.
Also, Dorian.
Yep.
While you published the Chrome extension, did they ask you for the single purpose justification?
When I did mine, it only asked me for, I sent you the screenshot, right? For the one that I filled in and submitted. Let me go back to the chat and see. Because for mine, it asked for less things, but I didn't have that storage one selected.
So the storage one just for the device storage, right? Not for local storage.
Right. Did it still get rejected, or did they get back to you? Or
No. They're asking for one more justification.
gotcha. And what's the justification that they're asking for?
It's under privacy practices. they're asking for single purpose description. Did it ask you for that?
Let's see. You said the scripting one, or
No. I think they all are done. It's a new one. I'll share you a screenshot on Discord. Just a second.
yeah.
You need to look at something on the screen too. I wasn't actually paying attention just now to what you're talking about.
No, you're good. It's with Chrome extension submission stuff.
Mm. Are you guys done with talking about that? You want me to go into this content block thing? real quick?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, he's gonna send me a screenshot on Discord and I'll follow up.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was totally just not listening. Let's see. Just finding all the rest of these things. Content block. Okay. So this is the Brolic or the Builder blog page. I always call Builder my old company name. It was like my company I always worked for my whole life. And then I came to Builder. So I always call Builder Brolic. It's so weird. Anyway, this is the Builder blog. And it's got like a section in the top for the title, which is like the actual blog post. So there's two tables. There's one for the blog posts, and then there's one for blog post content blocks. So the first table of the blog post is what includes like the title, a little excerpt image. That's kind of the main heading. And then what happens is the blog post page has a grid that loads in these content blocks. So I have a grid right here that's called content blocks, and it's just like blank, empty, and it runs this page called content block, which right now looks empty. But what happens is when it loads, like in this case, it's just setting a value when it loads and replacing some quotes. I thought it was going to do a little more. So in this case, we're just saving all of the whatever is in each content blocks, whether it's text or an image or a heading or whatever, we're just saving the HTML into the database. And then when we come back to the front end, it looks like I'm just reading that HTML back in. So it's actually very simple on the front end. So let me switch to the admin part because that's probably where I thought that the complicated stuff would be on the front end, but it's on the admin, I think. Okay. Just zoom out a little here. So this is like a blog post admin page. It's a little weird to look at. And this is our admin that we use internally. So it's not really styled that much. It's just like, this is what it looks like when we use it, but we'll actually like go to a URL and use this. It authenticates us and stuff. But anyway, like you enter your blog stuff up here. This is the stuff on the top of the page I was talking about, like the title and the image. And then here, there's a grid list of, looks like tiny MCE boxes. And this grid list here is where it would save. So I actually, this is a bad example because I'm not doing as much switching as I thought. So I have some examples where this grid list page will have the choice of a tiny MCE block or a single text block for a heading or an image upload element. And so you'd actually choose when you insert and it would display a different kind. But it looks like as I'm going through this, we just use all tiny MCE text boxes and just post them one after another. So it helps us with like the reordering, but it's not actually showing how to do the images, which was the original question. Trying to think like where I have, I know I have it places, but it's hard to remember on the spot, like which projects I built this in. Yeah, I don't know. Is that helpful? Like, should I try to find this project instead? Or I don't know what the original intent was. Or in fact, maybe it's better if I just find this later and post something on Discord. I can do a little video walkthrough. I don't know if I'll be able to find it now. And I know we're already over the hour limit. Anything else I should cover? Might be it for today.
Yeah.
I'm not hearing anything. I don't think I see anything in the chat, but it's hard to keep track. So, all right, cool. Yeah, that'd be great. Abdo too, if you create a demo of the blocks. It'd be cool to just like kind of show off that pattern of thinking too, because I think everyone would benefit from using it. It's actually better than just using the straight up WYSIWYG text editor. All right, cool. Yeah, I think we should probably wrap. Everyone's got to go anyway, and that seems like a good spot. So we'll try to get both videos up last week and this week, and then I'll follow up on some things in Discord for sure. Cool. Thanks, everybody. Later.
I'd see
Thank you guys.
Thanks.